At 7:42 on May 27, 1940, Captain Jack Churchill lay crouched behind a broken stone wall near the French village of Lepanet, his breath slow, his body perfectly still. Through the drifting morning mist, 5 German soldiers advanced cautiously along a hedgerow, boots crunching softly on gravel. Churchill was 33 years old. He had graduated from Sandhurst 14 years earlier. He had 0 confirmed kills in combat. The Wehrmacht had crushed Poland in 36 days. Now their armored spearheads were ripping through France at nearly 40 miles a day, and the British Expeditionary Force was collapsing toward the sea. Dunkirk was becoming the only way out. Churchill's company had lost 11 men in 72 hours. The Germans had better tanks, better aircraft, better coordination. British soldiers were dying by the hundreds along every road leading north. The retreat had become a rout. Officers burned classified papers in roadside ditches. Sergeants buried radios and heavy weapons they could not carry. Exhausted privates discarded rifles just to run faster toward the coast. But Jack Churchill was not running. Beside him, resting against the wall, was a 6-foot English longbow, darkened by years of use. It drew 70 pounds at full pull. In skilled hands, it was lethal out to 200 yards. And Churchill was skilled. Less than a year earlier, he had represented Great Britain at the World Archery Championships in Oslo. 26th place out of 63 competitors from 14 nations. Not a champion, but good enough to drive an arrow through a playing card at 50 yards. Good enough to kill a man silently. The German patrol closed to 30 yards. Churchill studied them calmly. The lead man was a sergeant, experienced, alert. His eyes moved constantly. Hedges, windows, ditches. He was trained to spot rifles, machine guns, grenades. He never thought to look for a medieval weapon. Churchill knocked an arrow. The bowstring came back smoothly to his ear. His fingers settled into the familiar anchor point he had practiced thousands of times. The yew creaked softly under tension. This was a shot he had made countless times. Just never at a human being. He released. The arrow crossed the distance in silence. The German sergeant dropped where he stood, the shaft buried deep in his chest. He made no sound. The patrol froze, confused, staring at their fallen leader without understanding what had killed him. It was the first confirmed longbow kill in a European war since the 17th century. It would also be the last confirmed longbow kill of the Second World War. And it happened because one British officer refused to accept that modern warfare had rendered ancient weapons useless. The British Army never quite knew what to do with Jack Churchill. He had followed the proper path, Sandhurst in 1926, a conventional infantry career with the Manchester Regiment, service in Burma. Then, in 1936, he quit the army entirely. Peacetime soldiering bored him. He worked as a newspaper editor in Nairobi. He appeared in films as an archer and bagpipe player, including a small role in The Thief of Baghdad. He rode motorcycles 1,500 miles across Burma and India, once colliding with a water buffalo on a jungle road. When war broke out in September 1939, Churchill rejoined immediately, but not as a conventional officer. He returned with his longbow. He carried a Scottish broadsword, a basket-hilted claymore straight out of history, and strapped to his pack were Highland bagpipes he had taught himself to play. His fellow officers thought he was eccentric. Some thought he was unstable. The War Office had no regulations covering medieval weapons in mechanized warfare. Churchill didn't care. He understood something that modern tacticians had forgotten. War was psychological. Firepower mattered, but fear mattered more. A rifle was expected. A machine gun was familiar. But a man charging with a sword, screaming a Highland war cry, shattered the enemy's instincts. And a man who could kill you without sound before you even knew he was there had an advantage no tank could negate. Between May 26th and June 4th, 1940, 338,000 Allied soldiers were evacuated from Dunkirk. They left behind their weapons, their vehicles, their equipment, and much of their pride. Jack Churchill returned to Britain with his bow, his sword, and his bagpipes. He had covered his unit's retreat. He had killed the enemy with weapons older than gunpowder. And he was only getting started. Within weeks, Churchill volunteered for a new formation the War Office was quietly assembling. They called them the Commandos. The training would be brutal. The missions would be suicidal. Casualties were expected to be catastrophic. Churchill requested permission to bring his sword, and bow on operations. The commandos said yes. By December 1941, he would be leading men onto a frozen Norwegian beach at dawn, bagpipes screaming into the Arctic wind, broadsword raised high, about to prove that sometimes the oldest ways of war were still the deadliest. The target was Vagsøy, a hard strip of rock off the Norwegian coast that controlled access to the fjords used by German ships transporting iron ore from Sweden, the raw material that kept Hitler's war machine alive. The island also housed fish oil factories, quietly converted to produce glycerin for explosives. The Germans had fortified it well, approximately 150 troops, for coastal artillery guns, and a dedicated anti-aircraft battery covered every approach. The raid was scheduled for dawn, December 27, 1941. Royal Navy cruisers would soften the defenses. Royal Air Force bombers would blind the gunners. Then the commandos would hit multiple beaches simultaneously, overwhelming the defenders before they could coordinate a response. If the assault stalled, the landing craft would be slaughtered in the fjord. Jack Churchill studied the intelligence obsessively. The German garrison was disciplined. Their artillery was properly sighted. Their machine guns covered every natural approach. This was not a symbolic raid. It would be fast, violent, or fatal. Churchill requested permission to lead the first wave onto Malloy Island, a small but heavily fortified position guarding the main approach to South Vagsøy. Permission granted. He requested permission to carry his broadsword. Granted. He requested permission to play the bagpipes during the assault. Granted, though more than one senior officer quietly questioned his sanity. The night before the raid, Churchill laid out his equipment. His broadsword was freshly sharpened. His bagpipes were tuned against the cold. He carried grenades, a revolver, and a Thompson submachine gun, but those were backups. He intended to open the assault with steel and sound, not bullets. On Christmas Day, 1941, the commandos boarded their transports and sailed north into the Arctic darkness. The temperature dropped below freezing. Ice formed along the rails. Men huddled below deck, checking weapons, writing letters home, pretending not to think about what waited for them ashore. Churchill spent the voyage studying maps and rehearsing signals. He had 105 commandos under his command. Their mission was brutally simple. Neutralize the shore battery on Malloy Island within 10 minutes of landing. Failure meant disaster. German guns would rake the beaches. Landing craft would be shattered. Hundreds would drown in freezing water. At 8:45, the transports reached their launch point 12 miles offshore. Landing craft were lowered. Commandos climbed down cargo nets into black water. Churchill took position in the bow of the lead craft, broadsword at his belt, bagpipes in hand. 90 minutes later, he would be dead or unforgettable. Smoke drifted across the shoreline as RAF Hampton bombers dropped canisters to blind the defenders. The cruiser HMS Kenya fired full salvos into the hills, her 6-inch guns shaking the fjord with thunder. Explosions lit the coast like lightning. Churchill stood fully exposed in the bow while his men crouched behind steel gunnels. 200 yards. 150. 100. At 8:48, the ramp slammed down onto the rocks of Malloy Island. Before a single man behind him moved, Jack Churchill stepped into the freezing surf. He raised the bagpipes and began to play. The March of the Cameron Men cut through smoke, gunfire, and exploding shells. Ancient, piercing, unmistakably Scottish. German gunners froze. They had trained to fight rifles. They had trained to fight grenades. They had not trained to fight a man calmly walking toward them playing music. Churchill finished the tune. He set the pipes down, pulled a grenade, threw it. Then he drew his broadsword and charged, screaming for his men to follow. The commandos surged forward. Thompson guns chattered. Rifles cracked. Grenades detonated inside bunkers. The Germans never recovered. Within 10 minutes, the island was taken. All 4 coastal guns destroyed. The anti-aircraft battery overrun. The German commander captured with 15 men. Those who resisted were killed. Those who surrendered were bound and evacuated. Churchill was everywhere, sword raised, directing attacks, clearing positions, leading from the front. By 9 o'clock, Malloy Island was secure. Then the radio crackled. The main force in South Vagsøy was in trouble. German reinforcements had arrived overnight. Intelligence had been wrong. Street fighting was underway. Casualties were climbing. Commandos were pinned down by snipers and machine gun nests. Churchill didn't hesitate. He gathered his men, seized a landing craft, and crossed the narrow strait under fire. What he found was chaos. Bullets snapped from rooftops. Machine guns dominated the streets. British commandos hugged walls, unable to advance. Churchill took command on the spot. Sword in hand, he led a flanking assault down a side street, moving from cover to cover. His men followed. The Germans broke under pressure from multiple directions. The fight lasted until mid-afternoon. Buildings cleared, factories destroyed, documents seized, over 100 prisoners captured. The cost was real: 17 commandos killed, 53 wounded. Churchill walked out unscathed. His sword was bloodied, his bagpipes untouched. The Vagsoy raid became the first major commando success of the war. It proved raids could work. It proved speed and violence could shatter fortified defenses. And it proved that Jack Churchill's medieval methods were not madness. They were devastating. Hitler was furious. He ordered 30,000 additional troops to Norway, men who would never fight in Russia or North Africa. 300 commandos had tied down an army. Churchill's reputation exploded. The officer with the bagpipes, the madman with the sword. By 1943, he commanded No. 2 Commando. His next battlefield would be Sicily, then Italy, and there, 42 German soldiers would discover that surrendering to a man with a broadsword was far preferable to dying on its edge. By the summer of 1943, Jack Churchill no longer traveled light. A Scottish broadsword hung at his waist. A longbow and arrows were slung across his back. Bagpipes rested under his arm. No one questioned it anymore. The men of No. 2 Commando had seen Vagsoy. They had watched fortified positions collapse under speed, noise, and shock. They trusted Churchill absolutely. Whatever madness lived in his methods, it worked. Sicily. The fighting there was relentless. German parachute troops reinforced Italian units. Panzer divisions blocked roads. Villages became strongpoints. Stone houses turned into bunkers. Every valley funneled attackers into machine gun fire. Churchill led his commandos through mountains and ravines, bypassing strongpoints instead of smashing into them head-on. They struck supply lines, ambushed patrols, gathered intelligence, and vanished before German armor could respond. By September 1943, Sicily had fallen. The Allies turned their attention to mainland Italy. Salerno. The plan was optimistic. Landing south of Naples. Light resistance. A quick breakout inland. The intelligence was catastrophically wrong. When No. 2 Commando hit the beaches at Salerno on September 9th, they ran straight into reinforced German positions. Artillery opened up within hours. Tanks counterattacked. Allied units were pinned down, bleeding, unable to advance. The invasion nearly collapsed in its first days. Churchill's commandos were ordered to hold Vietri-sur-Mer, a road and rail junction overlooking the Bay of Salerno. If the Germans took Vietri, they could pour artillery fire onto the beaches and annihilate the landing force. For 5 straight days, Churchill and his men held the town. From shattered buildings, from ditches and rubble, with ammunition running low and casualties mounting. German infantry attacked again and again. Tanks probed their defenses. Mortars walked fire across their positions. The commandos did not retreat. They called in naval gunfire. They counterattacked at night. They held Molina. On the night of September 14th, new orders arrived. German forces had occupied the hills above Molina, establishing an observation post that was directing artillery fire onto Allied positions below. As long as that post remained, the beachhead would bleed. A frontal assault would be suicide. Machine guns covered every approach. Mortars were zeroed in. Any large force would be destroyed before reaching the crest. Churchill made a decision no staff officer would have approved. He would take 1 corporal and go alone. 2 men could move where hundreds could not. They left after midnight, crawling through drainage ditches, moving along stone walls, freezing in place when patrols passed within yards. Just before dawn, Churchill spotted the glow of cigarettes. A German mortar position. The soldiers were relaxed, confident, safe. Churchill drew his broadsword. He stepped out of the darkness like something torn from another century. The Germans froze. He demanded surrender. They obeyed. Churchill used the lanyard of his revolver as a rope to lead the first prisoner forward. Then he did it again and again. Each time he appeared suddenly, calm, sword visible. Each time the Germans surrendered without resistance. Shock did what bullets could not. By sunrise, Churchill and one corporal had captured 42 German soldiers and an entire mortar squad. They marched them down the hillside. The wounded were placed on carts, pushed by their own comrades. Churchill later said it looked like a scene from the Napoleonic Wars. He received the Distinguished Service Order. The citation praised courage and initiative. It did not mention the sword. Some details were too strange for official paperwork. Italy breaks stalemate. By September 20th, the Salerno beachhead was secure. The Allied advance north began. Churchill and No. 2 Commando moved ahead of the main force, raiding, ambushing, capturing prisoners, spreading fear. German soldiers whispered stories. A British officer with a sword. Bagpipes in combat. A man who appeared out of nowhere and took prisoners without firing a shot. Some thought he was propaganda. Others prayed they would never meet him. Yugoslavia. By spring 1944, Italy had become a stalemate. The Allies needed new pressure points. Churchill was reassigned to Yugoslavia, where German occupation forces fought communist partisans under Josip Broz Tito. It was one of the war's most brutal theaters. Villages destroyed. Prisoners rarely taken. 500,000 German troops, and still losing ground. The British decided to support the partisans directly. Churchill arrived in April 1944, operating from the Adriatic island of Vis. The partisans liked him immediately. He fought beside them. He shared their risks. He did not act like a distant officer. The Germans noticed. Raids grew bolder. Supply lines vanished. Outposts were wiped out overnight. Something had changed. Brac. In May 1944, Churchill was ordered to help capture the German-held island of Brac, which controlled shipping along the Dalmatian coast. The force was uneven. 43 British commandos. A troop from another unit. 1,500 partisans, brave, but poorly equipped and loosely disciplined. The landing on May 2nd was unopposed. The Germans had withdrawn into the hills. The plan required immediate pressure. The partisans hesitated. They saw the fortifications and decided to wait until morning. Churchill was furious. Delay meant German reinforcements. Delay meant artillery. Delay meant disaster. But he could not force them. He waited through the night, knowing the Germans were preparing. And by dawn, the island would turn into something far deadlier than a raid. Churchill waited through the night on Brac, knowing the truth. Surprise was gone. At dawn, the island would bleed. The assault. The attack began the following morning. No. 43 Commando launched a flanking assault against the German hill positions. Churchill, leading elements of No. 40 Commando, attacked directly uphill. The partisans did not move. They remained at the landing area, watching. Churchill and his men advanced alone. The Germans were ready. Machine gun fire swept the slopes. Mortar rounds burst among the attackers. Men fell immediately. Progress slowed to yards, then feet. Churchill pushed forward anyway. Bagpipes screamed across the hillside. His broadsword hung at his side. He shouted encouragement, urging his men upward through smoke and fire. The attack stalled. A German mortar team found the range. Annihilation. The mortars landed directly among the commandos clustered near Churchill. The explosions were devastating. Every man around him was killed or wounded. Every man, except Churchill. He survived only because he had stepped slightly aside, standing exposed, playing his pipes to rally the assault. When the smoke cleared, he stood alone. Bodies lay across the hillside. Ammunition was gone. The Germans were advancing. Escape was impossible. The last song. Churchill did not run. He sat down on a rock. He lifted his bagpipes and began to play. Will ye no come back again? A Scottish lament. A song of farewell. A final act of defiance. German soldiers approached cautiously. They did not fire. They stared. A lone British officer, surrounded by the dead, playing music while facing certain death. A grenade exploded nearby. Churchill was knocked unconscious. When he woke, he was a prisoner. Berlin and Sachsenhausen. The Germans flew him to Berlin. They assumed any officer named Churchill must be related to the Prime Minister. They were disappointed. Jack Churchill had no secrets. No connections. No strategic value. Only a reputation. He was sent to Sachsenhausen, north of Berlin, a concentration camp for prominent prisoners, resistance leaders, political hostages, men expected to vanish quietly. For most inmates, Sachsenhausen was the end. For Churchill, it was an obstacle. Escape. He was housed in Sonderlager A special compound. Among his fellow prisoners were RAF officers who had survived the Great Escape. 50 of their comrades had been executed. These men lived knowing death could come at any moment. Churchill began planning immediately. He studied guard patterns, fence spacing, watchtower blind spots. A garden near the perimeter provided cover. Using spoons, scrap metal, and bare hands, they dug a tunnel from a drainage ditch. Dirt was hidden in compost heaps. The tunnel stretched 110 meters beneath the wire into woodland. On September 23, 1944, Churchill and 4 others escaped. Across Germany, Churchill paired with squadron leader Bertram James. Their goal, the Baltic coast. Distance, 200 kilometers. They traveled at night, hid by day, stole vegetables, drank from streams. No maps, no compass, no shelter. Cold set in. 2 weeks later, just short of the coast, a German patrol stopped them near Rostock. No papers, no explanation. They were returned to captivity. Austria. Churchill was transferred to a prison camp deep in the Austrian Alps. By late 1944, Germany was collapsing. Bombers filled the skies. The Red Army advanced from the east. The guards grew nervous. In April 1945, Churchill and 140 other prisoners were marched into Italy, intended as hostages. Then something unexpected happened. Regular German army officers intervened. Captain Wichard von Alvensleben deployed his unit, outnumbered the SS, and forced them to withdraw. The prisoners were abandoned. Free. One last march. Most prisoners waited for Allied troops. Churchill did not. He began walking south, 150 kilometers across the Alps. Injured ankle. No food. No weapon. No papers. After 8 days, he reached Verona and encountered an American armored reconnaissance unit. They didn't believe him. A ragged man claiming to be a British commando lieutenant colonel. He convinced them anyway. Authority has a sound. Home. Churchill returned to Britain in May 1945. Europe was at peace. He immediately requested transfer to the Far East. Japan was still fighting. And Jack Churchill was not finished. Jack Churchill wanted Japan. He wanted one last landing. One more beach. One more chance to carry his sword into battle and play his bagpipes in the face of an enemy who believed modern war had erased the old ways. The War Office approved his request. By the summer of 1945, Churchill was sailing east toward Burma, toward Japan, toward what he believed would be the final chapter of his war. He did not know that history was about to end the war without him. The war ends without him. Churchill was flying over India when the first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. August 6, 1945. One aircraft, one weapon, 80,000 dead in an instant. 3 days later, Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan surrendered. The Second World War was over. Churchill received the news with bitter disappointment. He had spent months studying Japanese defenses, tactics, and fighting doctrine. He had planned for an invasion that would dwarf Normandy. He had expected to lead commandos onto Japanese beaches under fire, sword raised, pipes screaming. Now there would be no invasion. No final test. His reaction became legend. He reportedly remarked that without the atomic bombs, the war might have continued another 10 years. It was a dark joke, but it revealed something fundamental about him. Jack Churchill was most alive when death was closest. Peace was foreign territory. A man without a war. The British Army did not know what to do with him. He was too aggressive for garrison duty, too eccentric for staff work, too famous to discard. His record was extraordinary. Distinguished Service Order with bar. Military Cross with bar. Multiple mentions in dispatches. Campaigns in France, Norway, Sicily, Italy, and Yugoslavia. Escape from a concentration camp. 42 prisoners taken with a sword. He was assigned to administrative duties in Burma, overseeing the transition from war to peace. He hated it. Paperwork bored him. Bureaucracy infuriated him. Compromise felt like surrender. He requested transfers. Volunteered for danger. Searched for a war that no longer existed. Palestine. By 1947, the British Empire was coming apart. Churchill was sent to Palestine as second-in-command of the 1st Battalion, Highland Light Infantry. The territory was collapsing into violence. Jewish refugees flooded in from Europe. Arab Palestinians resisted violently. British soldiers were caught in the middle. Bombings. Ambushes. Reprisals. On April 13, 1948, a Jewish medical convoy was ambushed en route to Hadassah Hospital on Mount Scopus. 77 people were killed. Churchill did not witness the massacre, but he faced its consequences. Jewish doctors, nurses, and patients were now trapped on Mount Scopus, surrounded by hostile territory. Supplies were cut off. Escape was impossible. Churchill organized the evacuation. He coordinated British units, Jewish authorities, and Arab leaders. He moved calmly through contested ground, negotiating under threat, projecting authority without force. 700 people were evacuated safely. When asked how he managed negotiations under fire, Churchill gave a simple answer. People are less likely to shoot someone who is smiling at them. It was the same principle he had used with a sword. After Empire, Churchill left Palestine shortly before the British withdrawal. Israel was declared. War followed immediately. He returned to Britain. He was 41 years old. The war that had defined him was gone. He accepted training and instructional posts. Qualified as a paratrooper in his 40s, jumping simply to field danger again. He taught commando tactics to younger soldiers who had never known total war. But peace never fit him. He needed movement, risk, purpose. He found it somewhere no one expected. The last charge. On July 21, 1955, a 48-year-old Jack Churchill stood on the banks of the River Severn in Gloucestershire. He held a homemade surfboard. Locals thought he was insane. The Severn bore, a tidal wave moving upstream, appeared as a white line against the brown water. Churchill paddled out. He rode the wave for over a mile, becoming one of the first surfers in British history. It was perfectly in character. He never watched danger pass. He wrote it. Retirement. Churchill retired from the British Army in 1959, rank lieutenant colonel. 30 years of service. 1 World War. Several smaller ones. A lifetime that defied explanation. His retirement was no less eccentric. He built radio-controlled warships and sailed them on local ponds. He refurbished steamboats and piloted them along the Thames. He played bagpipes at memorials, keeping commando traditions alive. His daily commute became legend. Each evening, as his train passed his home, Churchill opened the window and threw his briefcase onto the tracks. It landed in his garden. Every time. The end of the madman. Jack Churchill died on March 8, 1996, aged 89. He died peacefully in Surrey, far from frozen beaches and burning hills. A British newspaper wrote, if he had not existed, it would have been impossible to invent him. And it was true. A man who killed with a longbow in the age of tanks, captured prisoners with a sword in the age of machine guns, played bagpipes under mortar fire, escaped a concentration camp, walked out of war when war could not kill him. Jack Churchill did not change history through strategy. He proved something else. That courage still mattered. That imagination could overcome firepower. That one man refusing to accept impossible could bend reality around him. And that even in the most mechanized war humanity had ever fought, there was still room for a warrior from another age.